She has sold more than 150 million records. She has written more than 3,000 songs. She has built a library program that has gifted more than 250 million books to children who had none. She is Dolly Parton, the rhinestone queen of the Grand Ole Opry, the voice behind I Will Always Love You, the woman who made Dolly Parton look like the greatest invention the state of Tennessee ever produced. But behind that glittering legacy lies a story not made of rhinestones, but of something quieter and heavier. A story that began on the 3rd of March, 2025, when the man who had loved her since she was a teenage girl with a suitcase and a dream took his last breath in Nashville. And what came after that? The months of silence, the canceled stages, the emergency that sent a prayer into the night, was not something any award could have prepared her for. This is the story of what grief looks like when it happens to someone you thought was made of something indestructible. A woman who has survived poverty and doubt, and the full weight of a career that never once slowed down, standing still for the first time in 58 years. Not because the music stopped, but because the man who loved her before the music began was gone. If Dolly Parton's voice has ever reached inside your chest and moved something that needed moving, hit like right now, as a tribute to the woman who finally let herself break. Because it is one thing to lose someone. It is another thing entirely to lose the person who knew you before you became a legend. The Grand Ole Opry threw her an 80th birthday party. She didn't come, and if you want to understand why, and what it took to bring her back, then you need to stay with this story to the very end. Carl Thomas Dean was born on the 22nd of July, 1942, in Nashville, Tennessee. He was not a performer. He was not a celebrity. He was not interested in any of the things that make a man famous. He ran an asphalt paving company. He mowed his lawn. He drove his truck. And for 58 years, 9 days, he was the one constant in a life that never stopped moving. Dolly met him on her very first day in Nashville. She was 18 years old. He was 21. She had just stepped off a bus with everything she owned, and the kind of hunger that either breaks a person or makes them extraordinary. Carl Dean pulled up in a laundromat parking lot, and the rest, as the woman herself has said more times than anyone can count, is history. Not the history that gets written into music charts and Grammy citations. The other kind, the quiet kind, the kind that happens in kitchens and back porches and ordinary Tuesday evenings when no one is watching. They married on the 30th of May, 1966. He was 23. She was 20. And from that day forward, Carl Dean made one decision that would define their entire life together. He would love her completely, and he would stay out of her way. He appeared publicly beside her exactly once during her entire career. Once. In 58 years. He gave no interviews. He attended almost no concerts. He was, by every account, a man who understood something that most people never learn. That loving someone at the level Dolly Parton needed to be loved did not require being seen. It required showing up every single time she came home. In the final years of his life, Carl lived with Alzheimer's disease. Dolly became his primary caregiver. The woman who had spent 6 decades performing for millions narrowed her world down to one man in one house in Nashville. She rarely left his side. He died on the 3rd of March, 2025. He was 82 years old, and for the first time since she was a teenager with a suitcase, Dolly Parton was alone. There is a particular kind of love that does not make headlines. It does not walk red carpets. It does not give acceptance speeches or sit in the front row at award ceremonies. It exists entirely off the record, in the space between the last note of a concert and the moment the tour bus pulls out of the parking lot. In the phone call made from a hotel room in a city whose name she would forget by morning. In the porch light left on in Nashville, while the rest of the world was watching her shine somewhere else entirely. That was Carl Dean's love, and Dolly Parton has spent the better part of 6 decades trying to explain it to people who keep expecting it to look like something it never was. She has said, in interview after interview across the years, that the secret to their marriage was simple. Carl never came to see her perform. Not because he was indifferent, because he understood, in the particular way that quiet and steady men sometimes do, that Dolly the performer and Dolly the woman were 2 separate people, and that he had married the second one. He supported everything she did without making himself part of any of it. He cheered from a distance that looked, from the outside, like absence, but felt, from the inside, like the most reliable thing she had ever known. The world found this strange. Journalists found it stranger still. How could a marriage survive like that? One partner always leaving, always on stage, always in the light, and the other always at home, always in the background, always in the dark. Dolly answered that question the same way every time. She answered it with a smile that said she already knew something the journalist didn't. She answered it by lasting 58 years, when most of the marriages around her didn't make it to 5. What people did not always understand was that Carl Dean was not behind Dolly Parton. He was beneath her, the foundation she built everything on, the thing you never see, but that makes the building possible. He was the reason she could be fearless on stage, the reason she could take risks with her career and her image and her voice, because no matter what happened out there, no matter what the reviews said or the charts did or the cameras captured, there was a man in Nashville who was going to be exactly where she left him. She once said that she and Carl had spent many wonderful years together, and that words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years. It is the kind of statement that sounds simple until you sit with it, until you count the years, until you think about what 60 years of loving someone actually contains. The ordinary mornings, the difficult winters, the laughter that only exists between 2 people who have seen each other at their worst and decided to stay anyway. And then, the Alzheimer's came. It did not arrive dramatically. It never does. It arrived the way all slow losses do, in small moments of confusion that were easy to explain away, and then in larger ones that were not. And Dolly, the woman who had spent her entire adult life performing, stopped performing. She stayed. She scaled her world down from stadiums and sound stages to one house and one man and one day at a time. She became his caregiver with the same totality she had brought to every other role in her life. Not halfway, not with help she didn't need, but completely. People who knew them in those final years described a woman who had reorganized everything around Carl's care. The touring slowed. The public appearances thinned. The woman who had never been known for stillness became, for those years, very still. And there is something in that. Something that says more about who Dolly Parton actually is than any song she has ever written. That she would do that without hesitation, without resentment, without making it a story. She just stayed. He died on the 3rd of March, 2025, 58 years and 9 days after she married him, in a small ceremony with no fanfare, in a dress she has described as plain, on a day that changed her life in the quietest possible way. And now, the question that the rest of this story exists to answer is this: What happens to a woman like Dolly Parton when the man who kept her grounded is no longer there to hold the rope? The statement came on the 3rd of March, 2025. It appeared on her social media, clean, direct, written in the voice of a woman who has always known how to say exactly what she means, and nothing more than that. Carl and I spent many wonderful years together. Words can't do justice to the love we shared for over 60 years. Thank you for your prayers and sympathy. 12 sentences, 43 words. And inside those 43 words, the entire weight of a life. The public received the news the way the public always receives the death of someone adjacent to fame, with an outpouring of condolence that is genuine and enormous, and, in its enormity, somehow still insufficient. Because Carl Dean was not a celebrity. He was not someone the public had loved directly. He was someone they had loved by proxy, through Dolly's stories, through her gratitude, through the way her voice softened every single time she talked about the man who had waited for her in Nashville while the world had her everywhere else. His death was not the death of a public figure. It was the death of the private center of a very public life. And that kind of loss does not process the way ordinary grief processes. It does not follow the expected shape. Dolly did not disappear. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, she did the thing that people who have never learned to stop always do when they lose the one thing that was keeping them anchored. She accelerated. She leaned into the schedule. She kept the commitments. She appeared where she was expected to appear and said what she was expected to say and wore the rhinestones and the smile and the hair, because that is what Dolly Parton does. That is what Dolly Parton has always done. She performs. She delivers. She shows up. But the body keeps its own accounts. In the months that followed Carl's death, those closest to her watched something shift that no press release was going to address. The inner circle, the people who see a star not from the audience, but from the wings, grew concerned. The word that reached the outside world, carefully and without attribution, was that Dolly was driving herself to the edge. That the schedule she was keeping was not the schedule of a woman who was coping. It was the schedule of a woman who was running. And there is a difference, even when the calendar looks the same. Grief, when it is not given room, does not disappear. It goes somewhere. It goes into the body. It goes into the joints and the organs and the places a doctor finds when the lights finally go down and the costume finally comes off, and there is no more performance left to give. Dolly Parton had spent 58 years with a man who was her home. And now, the home was gone. And she was still showing up for every appointment as though the thing that had held her together had not just been removed from the foundation. She was 79 years old. She had been performing since before most of the people in her audience were born. She had survived poverty and doubt, and a music industry that had tried more than once to tell her who she was allowed to be. She had survived all of it by moving forward, by writing the next song, booking the next show, building the next thing. Forward motion was not just her strategy. It was her identity. And now forward motion was the one thing that was quietly costing her everything. By the summer of 2025, the signs were visible to anyone paying close attention. The schedule remained full. The output remained constant. But something underneath the output was beginning to give way. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that things give way when they have been held at full tension for too long without rest. Quietly, incrementally. And then, in September of 2025, not quietly at all. Because the body, when it has had enough, does not ask permission. It simply stops. In September of 2025, Dolly Parton did something she almost never does. She admitted, publicly, and without the usual layer of humor softening the edges, that her body was not cooperating. She revealed that she had been dealing with kidney stones, not as a footnote, not buried inside a longer announcement about something else. She said it directly, the way a woman says something when she has decided that pretending is no longer worth the energy it costs. The kidney stones were not the whole story. They were the part of the story she was willing to name. Sources close to her described a constellation of health issues accumulating in the months since Carl's death, the kind of accumulation that happens when a person has been running on grief and momentum and sheer force of will for long enough that the body finally presents the bill. She was 79 years old. She had been her husband's primary caregiver through the long and demanding decline of his Alzheimer's. She had absorbed that loss and then immediately returned to a full professional schedule. And now, 6 months later, the invoice had arrived. The Las Vegas residency, originally scheduled for December of 2025 at the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace, was postponed, moved to September of 2026. The announcement was careful and professional and said everything it needed to say between the lines. Dolly Parton, who had never been known for canceling, had canceled. Not a single show. An entire residency. 9 months of distance placed between herself and the stage she had built her life on. The public absorbed this with concern. And then, in October of 2025, the concern became something louder. Dolly's sister, Frida Parton, posted publicly that she was praying through the night for Dolly's recovery. It was not a vague or ceremonial statement. It was the kind of post a sister makes when she is frightened, when the situation is real enough that sitting with it in private has become impossible, and the only thing left to do is ask for help from every direction available. The internet, which has a particular sensitivity to the difference between a routine prayer request and an urgent one, reacted immediately. Within hours, Dolly Parton's name was everywhere, attached to headlines that ranged from the concerned to the catastrophizing, all of them circling the same unspoken question. Dolly answered the question herself. She posted directly, without intermediary, without a publicist's careful language smoothing the edges. I ain't dead yet. 4 words. The compression of a woman who has written 3,000 songs and knows exactly what each one costs. 4 words that were funny and fierce and heartbreaking in equal measure. Because they were funny on the surface and heartbreaking underneath. The way all of Dolly's best lines are. Because behind the defiance was the acknowledgement that the question had been real enough to need answering. Behind the humor was the admission that something had genuinely frightened the people who loved her. Behind "I ain't dead yet" was everything she was not saying. The months of grief, the physical toll, the particular exhaustion of being Dolly Parton in a world that still needed her to be Dolly Parton, even when Dolly Parton needed to rest. She later described that entire period with a precision that only someone who has lived through it could manage. "I just kind of got worn down and worn out," she confessed, grieving over Carl and a lot of other little things going on. And then, with the particular grace that has always been her signature, she added that she believed she had received a wake-up call. That something, she named it God, the way she always names the things she cannot fully explain, had told her it was time to slow down. Time to rebuild. Not to stop. Never to stop. But to rebuild. Because a woman cannot pour from a vessel that has run dry. And Dolly Parton, for the first time in 58 years, had finally allowed herself to be empty. There is a particular kind of return that is not about the destination. It is not about the stage or the lights or the crowd or the applause. It is about the moment a person who has been genuinely lost decides, with full knowledge of what it cost them to be lost, to find their way back, to stand in front of people who love them and say, not with a speech, not with a press release, but with the simple act of showing up, that they are still here, that the story is not finished, that the next chapter is beginning. On the 13th of March, 2026, Dolly Parton walked onto the stage at Dollywood in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. It was the opening of the park's 41st season. It was, by every external measure, a routine appearance, the kind of thing she had done dozens of times across 4 decades of Dollywood's existence. She had founded the park. She had opened seasons before. She had stood on that stage in every configuration of her life, young and hungry, middle-aged and triumphant, older and legendary. But this time was different. And the crowd that gathered that day knew it was different. And Dolly knew they knew. And so she did the thing that has always separated her from every other performer of her generation. She told the truth. "I've not been touring, as you know," she said, standing in the Tennessee mountain air with the park she built stretching out behind her. "I've had a few little health issues, and we're taking good care of them." A few little health issues. The understatement of a woman who had spent 6 months quietly rebuilding herself from the foundation up. Kidney stones. Grief so heavy it had bent her schedule and emptied her stages and kept her away from her own 80th birthday celebration. A sister praying through the night. A 4-word post that the entire internet had needed to hear. All of it compressed, with characteristic Dolly precision, into a few little health issues. Because she was not there to perform her pain. She was there to perform her return. And then she said the thing that this entire story has been building toward. The thing that needed to be said in her words, and no one else's, because no one else could have found these words, in this order, carrying this particular weight. "I just kind of got worn down and worn out, grieving over Carl and a lot of other little things going on. I just got myself kind of where I needed to build myself back up, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. But all is good. It didn't slow me down. Spiritually, emotionally, and physically. In that order. The order matters. Because Dolly Parton, who has been talking about God and grief and resilience since she was a child in the Smoky Mountains, with nothing but a voice and a need to use it, understood instinctively that the physical recovery was the last thing to come back, not the first. That before the body could return to the stage, the spirit had to find its footing, and before the spirit could find its footing, the heart had to be allowed to grieve the man it had loved for 60 years, without being rushed back into rhinestones before it was ready. She had given herself that time, reluctantly, imperfectly, with a sister praying and a 4-word post and a cancelled residency marking the edges of the surrender. But she had given it to herself, and now she was back. The crowd at Dollywood that day heard something that afternoon that the cameras captured but could not fully contain. The sound of a woman who had been to the bottom of something real and had come back up on her own terms, not restored to what she was before. That is not how grief works, and Dolly knows it better than anyone. But rebuilt, reoriented, carrying the loss with her the way she will carry it for the rest of her life. Not as a wound, but as weight that has become, over time, a kind of ballast. Someone in the crowd, with the particular boldness that Dollywood crowds have always been known for, asked about romance, about whether the woman who had loved Carl Dean for 60 years might one day love someone else. Dolly answered without hesitation. "I think Carl Dean's waiting for me," she said. "If I should show up at the pearly gates with somebody else, he would not like that. He'd be saying, 'Who's that little pisser? You leave him outside the gates.'" The crowd laughed, and underneath the laughter, something much quieter. The sound of a woman who has made her peace with a love that does not end at death, who has decided that the answer to the question of what comes next is not a new beginning, but a continuation. Carl Dean's waiting, and until that day, there is work to do. What does it look like when a woman who has lost everything that held her together decides that the answer is not to be held, but to hold herself? There is a particular kind of strength that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with fanfare or a press release or a headline designed to reassure the people who were worried. It arrives quietly, in a rescheduled date on a calendar, in a stage being prepared in a city that has been waiting, in the specific sound of a woman who has been through something real deciding that the something real is not the end of her story. The Coliseum at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas is ready. September of 2026. The residency that was postponed when the body said enough and the grief said not yet. It is coming. Dolly Parton is going back to the stage she was born to fill, carrying everything she has always carried and one thing more: the absence of the man who loved her first, the knowledge that the porch light in Nashville is not going to be on when she comes home. She is going anyway. The Broadway musical built around her life is in development, a production that will carry her story to stages she has never stood on, in a form that will outlast every tour and every residency and every chart position she has ever held. The Songteller Hotel in Nashville is taking shape, a monument to the music and the mythology and the particular genius of a woman who turned poverty and heartbreak and a Tennessee mountain childhood into one of the most extraordinary careers in the history of American music. The Imagination Library is still running, still placing books into the hands of children who need them, still building, one book at a time, the thing she has always believed in most: the idea that a child with a story in their hands is a child who has been given a fighting chance. She said it herself, in the plainest possible language, in the way she says all the things that matter most. I ain't near done. 3 words. The counterweight to 4. Because I ain't dead yet was survival, and I ain't near done is something else entirely. It is intention. It is direction. It is the declaration of a woman who has looked at everything she has lost and decided that the loss is not the loudest thing in the room. The Grand Ole Opry threw her an 80th birthday party, and she didn't come. She was grieving the man who married her when she was nobody from nowhere, and loved her for 58 years, exactly the same way he loved her on the first day. Some losses don't have a rhinestone you can put on them, not even for Dolly. But Dolly Parton has never needed the rhinestone to be real. She has always been real first, and brilliant second, and legendary third, and unstoppable in a way that grief itself could not permanently interrupt. Carl Dean is waiting, and until that day, she is not near done. If this story moved something in you that needed moving, leave a tribute for Dolly Parton in the comments below. Tell us what her music has meant to you. Tell us what this story made you feel. And if you believe that some loves are strong enough to survive even the longest silence, subscribe to Golden Fame News, because the legends we cover here are the ones who earned every word. What does it mean to keep going when the person who believed in you first is no longer there to see it? And do you think Dolly Parton is one of the greatest love stories that music has ever produced? Not just in her songs, but in her life?